Welcome to A Lovely Wallpaper, a podcast exploring an underappreciated way of appreciating poetry by committing it to memory. To know a poem by heart means having a worry stone, a provocation, a comfort, a quick exit, always close at hand. Lose yourself in a poem, gain a world with its mastery.
The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that a loss is no disaster.
In this episode, I am welcoming back Darryl Pinckney, critic and novelist, for the second part of our double interview, and also a second poem. He will be presenting James Fenton's In Paris with You, a funny, cynical, romantic, profound evocation of love, for which he himself was the muse. If I could boil these two interviews down into succinct themes, I would say the last episode revolved around mentorship and loss, and this one around love and music, and maybe procrastination as well. Since the day I recorded this interview, I was able to find the refrain we discussed from The Old Woman, which I have had sonically stuck in my head for years, but which neither Darryl nor I could remember the words to. This is how the hunger begins. The morning you wake feeling lively, then begins the weakness, then begins the boredom, then comes the loss of the power of quick reason, then comes the calmness, and then begins the horror. Committing these lines to memory, this time, rhythm and words. Hope you enjoy this chat as much as I did. We start with Darryl talking about a recent lost weekend that actually turned out not to have been lost at all. The more he talks, the more we find it brimming with artistic encounters.
Sort of a day off or goofing off has a different meaning when you reach my age and certain urgency of deadlines. But nevertheless, I sort of wasted the weekend doing absolutely nothing constructive. It's done.
Is it the Toni Morrison chapter you're working on still, or doing more?
I should be, but that was one of the things I was avoiding. Yeah, I'll get back to it.
Yeah.
There were these things that just came up that sort of interrupted me. I did get out. The Schomburg has an exhibition about the books from Schomburg's own collection that he acquired, and then that became the Schomburg Research Library. And for a long time, an inventory of what he had in the beginning doesn't exist, or they don't know where it is. And so some curators went through books and things to sort of find his book plates and things like that to try to assemble what had been his when it was started in 1926. And so there's an exhibition of books that he'd bought early on or acquired early on or was given early on, and also about some of the fellow Black bibliophiles of the time who he was in very close communication with. So it was rather touching and very interesting. These books are on display at the Schomburg and its exhibition gallery, and they had a couple of evenings of programs related to it. So I did get out, and I find I don't walk around in Harlem as much as I used to. Yeah. So it was nice to see beyond my corner sort of what's going on. And then there's a terrific exhibition of Peter Hujar photographs, a sort of reproduction of the last exhibition I think he had with other things. And I rather like Peter Hujar's work, and it had some things by a rather fascinating sculptor named Greer Langton, who had been Nan Golden's roommate back in the 70s and the 80s, and then some work by Paul Tech and David Wojnarowicz, and just coming across all these names again was very, can't find the word, touching, and to see that. And we heard some music, and We had a house concert here where a friend who admires James's poetry played 2 Beethoven sonatas, and I was in tears. It was so beautiful, and he's such an interesting scholar of the music as well, that when he talks about what he thought Beethoven was up to, it's rather riveting. And then he sits down and plays, and you listen with a sort of further or a new education, and it was just beautiful. And with sort of friends who came to wish James happy birthday. Because that's the way it started, that just as an admirer of James's poetry, Jeremy played, and then he comes back with this ever busier schedule and will play around James's birthday when he can. So it's really wonderful. And to hear music like that in a small chamber space rather than a concert hall is a very different experience. And you start to understand why people were writing these letters about Beethoven. It's rather overwhelming. So that was rather wonderful.
That's amazing. That sounds...
Yeah.
I can't believe you said you did nothing this weekend.
I didn't do much work, but life went on.
You can't measure everything just by the work. That sounds wonderful. Do you have other concerts in your house?
We have had,
friends play music?
Yes. Friends come over and practice. The acoustics in one room are particularly wonderful. So over the years, people have come to practice, or they'll try out programs they're about to take on the road. And it's been sort of a great, wonderful thing about New York and the house. And I think a couple of weeks ago, we had the Jack Quartet, and they do very experimental, for me, work these days, but they're such brilliant musicians, these guys, that just listening to them play a piece or a kind of music that's far from what I would be listening to on my own tells me a lot about it, just watching them, how it's put together, what they're doing. New York has always been a music town in that way, whether it's classical or jazz, or in my youth, new wave.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been to many refined home concerts, but a lot of basement concerts, concerts in Brooklyn back when I was younger. And it's great. The informality of it is,
and just the
spontaneity,
being together and listening. It's nice. I think in this case, given the subject, it's apt because poor James' poetry and music are very close, and music's very important to him. He was a chorister at the Durham Cathedral School. His father was a theologian, so his first home that he remembers was William Byrd's house at Lincoln Cathedral Close.
Oh, so, wow.
I know. And he translated Rigoletto for a Jonathan Miller production, and he's also translated Simon Boccanegra, and he did an opera with Charles Warren of Salman Rushdie's story, Haroun and the Sea of Stories. And he has another libretto called The Love Bomb, which I hope a composer would take an interest in and find it. So music has always mattered a lot to him.
Yeah, that's something that you share. I mean, you've done librettos yourself.
No, not for opera.
But you worked...
I did a musical with Lou Reed and Robert Wilson.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking of The Old Woman, which I went to see back in 2013, the Poems novel. And I think I emailed you about this. There's a line in it that's stuck in my head.
Oh, yes.
Remember, Baryshnikov and Willem Dafoe are rhythmically repeating and kind of dancing around. I woke up in the morning feeling sprightly, and then came the something of maybe good reason, something like that. I promised you I would look it up. And it's funny because we just spent a few minutes talking about the pains of a procrastination spiral and the good intentions of wanting to accomplish something and simply not. And maybe that's why that as a refrain seemed so...
I will go into that box and look and see.
Okay.
I did promise you I would, and I want to make good on that. And I can hear them saying it, because it is one of those lines that comes up and they repeat and pass it back and forth. I'm sure it's Carm's. I'm not entirely sure it comes from the old woman, since, I added things to it from other works of his to kind of fill things out.
I don't know his work well. How did you get involved in this project?
Bob asked me, because I certainly didn't know his work either, and didn't know him. And we're still discovering these Russian poets from around the Revolution that, well, I certainly didn't know in English. He was, Daniel Carms was a sort of dandy, younger generation, and moved into children's literature as a way to kind of avoid trouble, but he didn't succeed. And he died in prison, I think in 31 or 41, but he didn't have an easy or happy time. But his work is very kind of irreverent and mysterious, since he was maybe an early symbolist and then he got away from that.
What did you say in the last interview? A large door for adults and a small door for children.
Yes.
I think that's apt for certainly the old woman in your...
It was a wonderful piece, and Baryshnikov and Defoe were terrific. Bob was in a very inventive mood, set free by these... the kind of absurdist atmosphere of Carms that had just enough melancholy under it to give Bob enough meaning without overwhelming linguistic play. Yeah.
Was that your first time working on a piece like that? You've worked on other productions since, right?
But we did other things since. I did about 9 things with Bob over a long period of time. First starting in Berlin, 1988, The Forest, and then the next year an adaptation of Orlando that traveled quite a bit and was done by different actors. It was first Jutta Lampe, not the singer, but the actress, Jutta Lampe at the Schaubühne. She was extraordinary. And then Isabelle Huppert did it in Switzerland, and then eventually I think Paris, and Miranda Richardson did it at Edinburgh. So it went on. I was a bit sort of worried about it. I was never a fan of Orlando, not the novel by Woolf I particularly liked, but it made it easier to mess with it. It wasn't sort of so sacred. And I think I learned a lesson because hearing it in German sounded fine to me. I don't really have French, so it sounded even better. In English, I was, rather taken aback. And Howard Hodgkin said to me, well, we saw Orlando, it was really boring. And I said, I did that. He says, yes, I know. Howard didn't monkey around. He thought what he thought. But other people liked it a lot, so that was okay. And then after Orlando, some time went by, because I moved from Berlin to Oxford. James had come back from the Far East, and he got this derelict pony farm and wanted to make a garden. He sure did, but he didn't want to go back and forth between Oxford and Berlin, so Oxford won. And Bob didn't have the same relationship to English audiences that he did to continental audiences. It was a very different theatrical tradition. But in the meantime, he'd done a musical with Tom Waits and William Burroughs based on their Freischütz. And then I think he did another, maybe with Marianne Faithfull. So this was a sort of trilogy in Hamburg in like 1995. It was Lou Reed. So Lou Reed was fun. And then there wasn't anything for a long time. And then The Old Woman. He asked me to do The Old Woman. And then the next year, Letter to a Man was the Nijinsky piece with Baryshnikov. And then after that, we did a musical in Brazil about football called Garrincha, a musical from the streets. And it was about this great football player, sort of mixed ancestry from Northeast Brazil, Indian, and I don't know how we would say it in Brazilian language. But this young and very wonderful cast, darker than what Sao Paulo was used to seeing on the stage, but they were terrific. It's just that the country was going through quite a bit of upheaval at the time, so it didn't really travel, but it was a great experience. And I'll never sort of forget Brazil at this time because the music was so amazing. Not to mention football culture. It was quite something to experience. And then after Garrincha, there was Mary Said What She Said of Isabelle Huppert, doing this piece I wrote based on the letters of Mary, Queen of Scots, which was phenomenal to watch her and Bob work together. She is a real genius of discipline. She's the most sort of happy family life, comes from a happy family, and she can play bizarre people like you've never could imagine them. She's a really, really gifted person.
I remember when New Directions put the reissued Malina. I read it and I went to, a screening of the film. And then I realized she did that the same year as her Madame Bovary.
Yeah.
It was so interesting to think about all the connections between those two characters,
Yeah.
played so differently, but fundamentally kind of.
Yeah. She works all the time. She's made so many films recently. I don't even try to keep up, but she is really towering figure in my mind. So that was, a privilege to watch this piece come into being. And then after that, it was Pessoa, Since I've Been Me. And I told Bob I didn't know anything about Pessoa, this Portuguese poet. And he said, perfect. And that was just a kind of matter of selection. But again, and it was done in Florence originally, and with this young cast, and I forget the name of the woman who played Pessoa, and she's one of Portugal's most revered actresses, so it's embarrassing that I can't remember Marie's name. Anyway, that was rather wonderful to watch. And when Bob died last summer, we were in the middle of rehearsing another piece with Baryshnikov, an adaptation of Don Quixote, where Baryshnikov would play Sancho Panza, but his voice would be Don Quixote unseen. Quite crazy. And included in it, in the sort of adaptation of the text, were these poems that James had written for a production of Don Quixote with music that was done at the Royal Shakespeare Company maybe 10 years ago or more. And Baryshnikov rather fell for the poems, so he was very enthusiastic about the project, and then poor Bob died. But they're trying to realize the piece as a film, some elements of what Bob had sketched or managed to stage, and I hope that works. It's a very different kind of thing because he comes from dance, not from theater, but he works as hard as Isabelle Huppert. And that's quite instructive. That, you can have every gift, but the hard work is essential. Absolutely essential.
Yeah. If you wake up in the morning feeling sprightly, you've got to keep that sprightliness going.
Well, or convert it into sheer will. Will defeat your own gloom.
Speaking of music and words, and speaking of the motivation continuum, can we talk about Black Deutschland for a moment? I love the character of Cello. Can you tell me a little bit about Cello and that character and how you developed her?
Well, I have a dear friend who's a brilliant pianist, but she won't play in public because she's too shy. And that always sort of stuck in my head. And she also, I think, for me, Cello represents someone who was able to assimilate into a kind of European world. And she wasn't an exile or an expatriate. She married a German. She had children. So in some ways, she belonged. She traded one thing for another. In the novel, she comes from a rather dysfunctional sort of Chicago family of not sort of liberal humanities tradition or even the professional class, but business people in Chicago, Black business people who were maybe rather important in the 40s and the 50s. But then these businesses got superseded in some ways because of integration, the Black newspaper, things like that. And so, but she was able to make the transition. But maybe
support from Jed, your main character's family, right?
Yes, because I think that she represented for them this old-fashioned Negro achievement. And Chicago was a home of where were Black women, musicians and composers who were also teachers. So that was sort of in my mind. Florence, I'm going to get her name wrong, Bond, or is it Margaret Bond? But there are two Black women composers that are connected to Chicago. And of course, in my early memory wiped mind, I can't come up with their names right now. But they were very much on my mind. And she also, in some ways, represents people in that generation who failed to fulfill the promises of opportunity and therefore Negro achievement. And that's part of the story of the talented 10th failure, not being able to do it or collapsing under the pressure of it. It's especially true of men. And I have a friend, a really brilliant writer named Margot Jefferson, who is from Chicago and from that world. And she often remembers these guys who somehow never realized their early promise or their early opportunities. And I hope she writes about them because their stories are very moving and instructive in some way. But in my own way, I had that kind of figure in mind with Cello and Jed. That sort of, Jed's an escapee for various psycho reasons, but Cello is a kind of escapee who found a better path.
It creates a lot of tension between them.
Yes. Neither wants to see himself or herself in the other.
Right.
Or to be reminded of these roots that asked a lot of them and that they felt in some ways they disappointed. Cello's way is to be superior to them, and Jed's way is just to betray them.
The mother says to Jed, like, she may be a monster about Cello, but she's our monster, right? I thought that was...
Well, we used to say that about Susan Sontag.
Oh, it's a lot.
That's where that comes from.
And that's interesting. Oh,
yes. Well, people always, sort of treated poor Susan in this way or regarded her in this way. And she had a very tough public persona because this extremely vulnerable person, predictably, was behind it. I always found her rather fragile and vulnerable and sweet and impossible, but terrific, a sort of terrific soul.
Well, she meant a lot to your personal life, right?
Yes, yeah. She introduced me to James. So why not? And she was a great teacher because she had this energy to go to everything, to see everything. She couldn't tolerate intellectual laziness. She just really didn't like it. So she could sit through 7-hour films that you would rather kill yourself than see ever again, or 12-hour productions in the theater. She had a huge kind of sympathy for the avant-garde. But that's another thing that I found very inspiring about her, is that I don't think I've sort of seen it spelled out or gone into the little I can bear to read about her, is this, what the avant-garde in America represented especially in the early 60s, was this, the legacy of modernism, which was very universalizing. And so it had very little to do with identity politics. In fact, nothing to do with it. Identity was something you left in the attic of where you came from. So I know people mean well to sort of include a biography of Susan Sontag in the Jewish Lives series. And I know the guy writing the book, and he's a terribly nice guy, but no one had so little to do with being Jewish than Susan. It wasn't even secular. I mean, I'm sure she was glad her name was Sontag, not Rosenblatt, but, she wasn't, there was no repudiation or running from or anything of the kind. It just didn't figure. If anything, there was a kind of repudiation of these anglicizing Jewish guys like William Christo or Lionel, anglicized Jewish guys like William Christo or Lionel Trilling, who were doing something of sort of distancing themselves from that culture. But she doesn't at all. She was, and anyone in that world was, you were in downtown New York to make yourself up unencumbered by any personal past, And that was true of Robert Wilson too. He was from white collar, very straight-laced Texas. And the only thing he brought from that was he had wonderful manners when he needed to. But the rest, no. So she once dragged me over the coals for not minding being called a black writer. Aren't you a writer who just happens to be black? And I said, no. And this really offended her, because it was, for her, categories. It's a bit like Elizabeth Bishop not wanting to be in an anthology of women's writing. This was sort of not what they were about, and also as women wanting to sit with the big guys. So in part, Susan's manner, her public image came from these graduate seminars where guys expected her to be quiet and, that they could sort of talk over her, but she felt, I know more than you do. And she would, not be silenced or talked over. So she battled on as a woman who believed in, my intelligence makes me not just equal, but maybe better than you, and I'm not going to apologize for it. So men had a hard time with her because she was, she's not talking to you from her women's point of view. Not at all. This was a major difference between her and Elizabeth Hardwick, whom she greatly admired. But, Lizzie was always a woman and always conscious of her position in society as a woman. But Lizzie could do things with the language that Susan never could. So Susan was really enamored of her as a writer, even if she didn't want to share that kind of consciousness as a woman. There's a volume out now of Susan Sontag on women, so not that she didn't address these issues, but, she wore trousers when she did, and not heels,
And also maybe she didn't invite a different way of thinking into the structure the same way that Elizabeth did. Elizabeth Hardwick did. I mean, one of the things I wanted to talk about on Black Deutschland was the way you've structured this book. The background of Jed is constantly encroaching on the scenes on the story that's happening in Berlin, and vice versa. When Jed is remembering Chicago, tiny little memories of Berlin come up. And I think it's so interesting. One of the refrains, I'm forever interested in the types of words that stick in people's memory, not just poetry, but in this book, when Jed is in Berlin, there are always just these little teeny passages where Uncle Ralston or the father or the mother says a maxim or something like that, whether it's like, these are pancake days, or...
Yes. His father makes no sense, but I mean, you carry yourself with you wherever you go. And so one experience is always informing the other, whether you want it to or not. And sometimes he's comforted by it, like the only people who will understand are those back there. And then sometimes he's tormented by it, because being back in Chicago is threatening to his sense of what he wants and what he's trying to do. And then, there's that other layer of he could be a snow queen more comfortably in Europe than he could be in Chicago. So it's this black and white world battling in him, but he's the unhappy referee of.
Right. I mean, it's fun, and it plays out in a lot of different things besides just the dating thing, besides just the interracial relationships. It plays out in this like commune that he's living in. In that case, I mean, I feel like all sexual aspirations are kind of disappointed there, but the conversations he has to have with himself about whether he's okay with potato farming. He wouldn't be okay with eating potatoes back in Chicago, or,
No.
clearing up everybody's dishes back in Chicago, but is it racialized there or not?
Yeah. He can be a hippie in Berlin, but you're just a black guy in the serving class in Chicago. He fears. It's maybe not true, but this is his, how does he want to be seen to himself? And that's a big problem for him, how he sees himself, and mistaking how he sees himself for how the society where he is, or the context where he is, sees him. So in a way, he has a kind of perverted double consciousness, because his own hang-ups he projects onto the people he thinks are looking at him. And is there any other kind?
Yeah. It's really interesting to juxtapose the mirror he can see in Chicago and the mirror he can see in Berlin, and how he's imagining both of those.
I'm very moved that you would take the trouble to try and think about him in this way.
It was a lovely book.
Not everyone liked that book or got it. So I wondered if I got it, but I had a wonderful time writing it, because I could fill it with all my love for Berlin at that time, which was, a very special experience, even a guilty one in retrospect, because our unlimited freedom depended on the unfreedom of millions around us, which, we thought about in the most perfunctory way. Yeah.
No, it's a fascinating depiction of the city, and the way you interpreted it, being there as this kind of outsider with a different agenda. Not in a bad way, but in a naive way. In the way of a naive kid who travels to deal with their family drama by not dealing with it, or deal with their personal turmoil by changing the environment.
Yeah. And, he had a different story from the black GIs he met who were there in that very traditional way of just not going back to something that they rejected,
You certainly engaged with Christopher Isherwood in the writing of Black Deutschland.
Yeah, my whole life. Well, it's one of those books that you come across at a very certain time and sticks in your head. I mean, I can remember reading the Berlin stories when I should have been writing a paper for Michael Wood. And it just sort of really struck me. A very deep chord. Also because, at this time there wasn't yet gay lit, and so it was something, its codes spoke to me directly. I mean, I knew who was whistling to him from the street. He didn't have to sort of spell it out. In a later memoir, Christopher and His Kind, he takes himself to task for what he wasn't able to be direct about. But then also, when I read it, Weimar was being sort of rediscovered in New York, and the Three Penny Opera had a new production, things like that. So Weimar was very in as a subject. And one of the mistakes the East Village made in its intense interest in Weimar is that, as Jane Kramer once said, Isherwood's Berlin was also Hitler's. No one paid attention to this parallel story of the rise of fascism. It sort of took everyone by surprise. But it did. And then I think the summer after I read it, Cabaret came out. I was back in Indiana. I saw the film 13 times. So I was gone, and.
So then you read Berlin stories, and all this was before you moved to Berlin. Was that?
Yes, but it was always the guiding light. And then what Isherwood did, his style, this rather, deceptive naturalism, so that in a way the selection was already done off camera or off screen in what he chose to write about, but making himself a character who was the narrator. And, not much happens to him other than, well, he moves in with the Novaks and he goes on Rugen Island, and Sally Bowles rejects him. He doesn't have to reject her, but he's there as an observer, but he's present so that the voice is, a first person voice, but it's one that's sort of looking at everyone else, not so much dwelling on his own interior. And that attracted me, that you didn't have to explain yourself too much, or what you were looking and what you were saying was revealing of yourself enough. It gave the first person a new authority that matched the omniscient, well, not match the omniscient narrator, but could sort of frame things that same way. I think I liked Colette for the same reason, but there were two Colette books that I was thinking about, The Vagabond, but especially The Pure and the Impure. There's one of those books I got from Lizzie's shelves, and she's writing as Colette, and people know she's Colette, but she's looking at them, And so I always thought that was a very strong position to write from. Here I am, but, look at this.
Right.
See what I see.
I love that. You said somewhere that you didn't like Isherwood's California stuff?
No.
Does that mean you don't like A Single Man?
Not entirely, no.
Oh.
Not
That's
entirely.
Interesting. I love that.
I would have to read it again, because I haven't read it in many, many years.
I remember Elizabeth Hardwick was pretty hard on it, but that was...
Well, for anti-homo reasons, which I thought, that was very naughty of her. No. But it was too much of the body for her, in a way.
Right. It starts off pretty scatological.
Yes. And I've tried to watch the screen adaptation of it.
I've never watched that.
Yeah, I didn't get very far with it.
Yeah. There are some books I just don't want to see a film of. But...
After a while, no.
Yeah.
I remember...
Vacation of Orlando, because I actually do like that book.
Well, it turned out that Sally Potter, is that who made the first Orlando film?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I think that's the one with Tilda Swinton.
Okay.
And she had a sort of, no one had bothered at the theater in Germany or in Robert Wilson's office to clear the rights. And she had a contract that sort of gave her ban on theater productions, etc. She was very gracious about not screwing them over and let them do it. So, I liked the film. It's just I don't find Woolf as funny as she thinks she is. Or that's not the voice that I sort of impose limits on Woolf that I shouldn't.
That's interesting. I guess I never would have thought of it that way. I mean, I suppose I'm just totally taken in by the ice carnival at the beginning. And
that's wonderful.
Things that are just so sweeping and beautiful that.
Yes. I mean, it's a lot of the panorama of history in it I like a lot. I was never interested in Vita Sackville West. That's another problem. I don't like the land and, I never went to Knoll. Sissinghurst is where her garden is, which is my own fault. But I was never a Vita Sackville West person. So that's another part of it. A small part, but an irrational part that, has more influence than it should.
Yeah, but as a reader, you bring yourself to the reading, so.
Yes, but, you should leave your own baggage somewhere along the road in the book, And I didn't write to Orlando, and I couldn't write to Orlando, so I feel I've got a nerve not liking it. But then I was so into Woolf as a student that I find going back to her novels a bit like looking at a photograph of a lost love. I can read the nonfiction and the diaries very happily. It's like saying hello to someone's parents. But I get troubled trying to read the novels again because, the memories of my own stupidity are sort of evoked by these pages and, the imitations of Mrs. Dalloway. And I think, as I said before, I once tried to commit the waves to memory. It's
incredible task.
It's a phase that you just can't visit.
Because you're looking at your own copies with your notes, or if you looked at a clean copy, would you feel differently?
I never make notes in Hogarth Press editions of Woolf because they were sort of sacred objects, so I didn't. Also, it wasn't poetry, so I would really deface poetry with my own lines in response to things, Even, my Donald Allen Frank O'Hara has really stupid Frank O'Hara imitations in it, or Ginsberg has, my own attempts at Supermarket in California, which is one of my favorite Ginsberg poems. But prose, I somehow, of the Hogarth editions with those covers, back then I wouldn't touch, or even underline.
So it's not a question of the physical evidence of your...
No, it's just, it's not the book's fault.
Brings up the memories.
That they remind me of me back then. It's not Will's fault at all. It's another kind of narcissistic...
You at an intense moment.
At a wishfully intense moment or something. I can't explain it. But I find reading her fiction again, I can't do it. Whereas I can, look things up in the Common Reader or a lot of the essays I don't know in new editions of the essays. She's such a kind of wonderful writer who will tell you what she's thinking at that very moment. It's something that in Zadie Smith that reminds me of Woolf as an essayist, that boom, she will see something at that very moment And, it's the mind at work that's very exciting. And it comes from her life as a reader, since that was her only education, sitting and reading and reading and reading.
So let's talk a little bit about James's poetry now as we lead up to reading in Paris with you. Yeah.
Well,
Probably talk to him about it sometime, but since
no, not really, since he is not a big one for explanations
okay.
At all, but very steeped in the tradition of English poetry. And, the underlying conflict between us, especially in the beginning of our knowing each other, was my attachment to New York poetry. He does not like John Ashbery and wrote a very notorious review of the selected poems long before I met him in 1975. And I'd never read it, so that was rather good. Years later, Ashbery, who was such a gracious guy, I tried to get them together in Paris, and Ashbery was very nice, but James wasn't particularly. And so, just wasn't talkative. But
Sounds like
then, as before I realized how shy James is, I didn't quite understand that at the time, but he's really shy. It's one of the things that drew me to him, because poetry is so much of what he is. I mean, he's one of these people whose head is full of poetry that he knows, and all sorts of poetry. He and some of his friends can sit there and quote nonsense verse till the cows come home, and laugh their heads off and things like that. At the same time, there's lines from Shakespeare that he knows just comes at will, and he knows lots of poems and stuff. But early on, the New York poets, no. But I'm not going to give up Frank O'Hara for anybody, that kind of thing.
It's interesting because it's one of the things I noted in getting to know the rest of his work a little bit, at how incredibly non-confessional and how incredibly...
Oh.
It's interesting, his engagement with history.
Yes, that's a big thing.
Contemporary events, his engagement with war and injustice in the world, and also his engagement with forms of bygone eras, like the Spanish songs, should be from centuries ago. It blew me away. It was interesting. People don't do that.
I don't know if John Fuller was his tutor, but he was certainly an important early influence. And John Fuller was always very interested in poetic form. James's greatest influence is, of course, Auden, whom he met when he was 15. Auden's grandfather's church isn't far from Repton, where James had been at school. And I think he organized a reading on Auden's name day and wrote to him. And James didn't tell me this. I know this from a friend of his. Auden looked at the letter and thought, who is this kid? And got in touch with him, and, had a lot to do with how James saw himself. He had been a classicist, or intending to be a classicist, but he always came out number 2 to his best friend, Richard Seaford. And so he's thought, I'm not going to go into the classics, But Auden said, don't make poetry, don't become, an English teacher, do something else. And I think James, he had a sort of poet's degree in PPP from Oxford, and then went to work for the New Statesman. But his grandmother made it possible for him to go to Cambodia, which he fell in love with. And he was really very taken with it. But then these terrible things began to happen, and I've never talked to him in depth about it, the people he lost. I know that he went back to find some of them and couldn't. But, they had to sort of flee Cambodia, and when Saigon was falling, he thought, I'm not going to run away this time. And so he happened to be among the last journalists in Saigon when it fell. And 10 years later, wrote about it for Bill Buford and Granta, the fall of Saigon. And his sort of career as a foreign correspondent began on these terms. And he was in the Philippines. He was one of the founders of the Independent newspaper. And he was this Asia correspondent based in Manila. But he said, I can't do China there. But he was in Manila and went to Korea. And these were troubled spots in these times of upheaval. We even have still one of Imelda Marcos's bath towels, because when he ran with the mob that sacked the palace, it was the only thing he could bring himself to take. And
what a souvenir.
I know. And he had a long connection with the Philippines and even began a prawn farm on an island over the mountains to the east of Manila, that one of his most lovely poems, The Milkfish Gatherers, is about.
So that little epigram about the prawn spawning.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Exactly.
That popped into my head when you said prawn farm. Interesting.
And then he at some point decided that he couldn't go on going to danger zones. He had friends who covered danger zones, and it was time to go to Lebanon. He thought, no, I sort of can't do it. And he was, for the London Times, the first Intifada was so upsetting, but he couldn't write about it. He wrote this poem, Jerusalem, instead, that the London Times sort of published instead of a story. And he just sort of wouldn't do it. He was a foreign correspondent in Germany, I think in 87, something like that. But he'd already been a theater critic back in London and sort of book reviewer, things like that, but just wouldn't sort of take on the danger zones. That was too hard because of the suffering. I think he wouldn't say so, but I think what he saw was a bit too much for him. I remember one of the first things I read by him, he covered the famine in Africa for the New York Review in 1985. But by that time, I'd already heard of him because Children in Exile had come out and was reviewed by Seamus Heaney in the New York Review. So the first time I saw any poetry by James Fenton was these quoted lines from the poem Wind, which is very beautiful. And then when I was in Berlin, shortly before our unification sequence of events, and we were in the Paris bar, this restaurant where Susan and I went every night, and so was he, and she introduced us, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But the invention, the inventiveness, and the attention to form is very English, and the connection between verse and song is very Auden. And these things, I think, been major sort of for him, because also his interest in musicals and libretto and song and all that. I think he gets offended when people separate song from poetry, and thinks that's a very American thing, and thinks of American poetry as having gone too academic and not enough, realness to it.
That's interesting. I mean, the sound in the song in his poems, it's definitely central. I keep on thinking about the poem Cosmology from kind of towards the end of Yellow Tulips, because it's just such an interesting meditation on memory being passed down between humans, but the vessel of the memory being lost. So in the oral history is kind of our only way back into the past.
Yes.
All evidence was destined to be lost, every chanted word, every sketch in the sand, all thoughts committed to leaf and skin. And this largest thought, this first cosmologist, must have grasped for an instant before shying away from it, pushing it away from him to wait, as these questions have waited for their tens of thousands of seasons, patient or indifferent to our expertise.
Yes. What does that mean?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I mean, I think it's about the way knowledge is held, right? It's about the way we know that humans have this accumulation of knowledge, of poetry, of thought, even when the record isn't there. Does that make sense? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also saying, the evidence is there, but the human hand that sort of made them or why they did isn't.
Yeah. Is
So that,
space with time. And that even
yeah,
in the move towards knowledge and truth, the questions will still be there. They're never solved. This poem struck a chord with me too, because my kids are, always asking just because of their age, who was the first person who thought of eating an artichoke? Stuff like that. How did somebody decide to put that in their mouth? And it's something to ponder, how did somebody decide to draw a picture the first time?
Yes. How did knowledge become knowledge?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
and then our there's this passage in the poem about we have marked the first lands to be beleaguered by tillage, and the epic when sheep first yielded wool. We can question the composition of a tooth. We have these scientific approaches now, but
The music is
part of the question that only our imaginations can answer, or only our ways of being human can imagine,
yeah. Or just, the transitory nature of life itself and what it leaves behind. And that civilizations are not as guaranteed as we sort of go on thinking that they are just because ours is here, and, what did they sing to get to where they were going? We can't know, but they must have. So I think it's also about, yes, living your life when you're living, in a way.
Yeah.
I think that he writes very intimately about things on a grand scale, and brings them down to your thoughts standing there in the cave looking at the paintings and wondering, who did them and why, and what am I at the same time leaving for someone else that doesn't need for me to be there. I think it's sort of very much a part or central to being at heart a lyric poet, not a confessional poet, so that the I becomes everyone's I. There was a time when in Paris with you was on the exams for A level, and I got one of the sort of study guides, and it was riot what they were saying this poem was about and who was speaking, and, the girlfriend who was pissed off in the poem or something like that. The poem was thought to be an appeasement or something. But, that's in a way fine by him because, it has to have its own life in the world.
Right.
There's no correct interpretation.
Yeah. I'd imagine that the same feeling comes through no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter how someone's staging the relationship and
Yeah.
casting the relationship in their head. Right?
Yeah.
But that's so funny. What
I
a
know.
to have one's poem on standardized exam. Especially this poem. That's interesting. Wait, now you met in a bar called the Paris Bar, huh? Interesting.
In Berlin, yes. But he had a musical, or what he called a pocket musical, of some of the early poems in Out of the East. It was done at the Little Odeon, I think in 1990 or around then. And we met in Paris and stayed in a crummy hotel, which I can't remember the name of. The Hotel Racine, it's gone now. The building's still there. And a couple of years ago, we actually walked around and peeked up at the windows, and because it's near the Odeon. And yes, the details are true, but then, they're written so that they're true for everyone. It's not, as I said, it's not confessional poetry, even if the speaker is confessing. It's sort of just this kind of lyrical heart.
Right. And, even if the detail of Paris is true, it's about an idealized place, that Paris becomes more than just Paris.
Well, Paris means what it does to so many people, the city of romance and love, that he doesn't have to say anything
Right.
about that. In fact, he can sort of say, let's not do that, any of that, sort of romantic stuff. And just stay here and be crummy, which is also true.
Crummy and be real.
Yeah. And then I always admired the way he could, use a form and not call attention to it, or write in blank verse and not call attention to it. But this is sort of much more a free exercise than a lot of the other poems in Out of Danger and in the Collected Yellow Tulips, because it sort of, got this bridge, this sort of jazz bridge to it. And I'm sure the stanza form, the 5 lines may have a name or an antecedent, but I don't know it.
I'm embarrassed to say, neither do I. I didn't.
I didn't take that exam. I was excused.
Yeah, I mean, this poem, it does have the feel of a lost jazz standard, and it's the tone of it is so great, and the high and the low and the.
And it has been set to music. I mean, a few times people have sent him recordings or the sheet music, and I've listened to a couple of tunes on YouTube, and
You said that. I'd been meaning to look it up, but I haven't.
Well, it's worth looking up recordings of him reading. He always, at his readings, he hasn't given a reading in a long time. It's one of the unfortunate things about being in the United States is this, the English poetry world of readings. He isn't in, but when he was reading a lot, it was always from memory. And he is a great reader of any poetry, and especially of his own, because you can hear the way he meant it, and it always comes with a lot of power and ferocity or quiet. And, I sort of fell for the voice twice. The one I met, and then the one in performance. It was terrific. And I remember Christopher Hitchens, his old buddy, told me a story about Susan reading in Washington, and he and his wife were going to have a party for her afterwards, so they didn't go to the reading. They were arranging the party, and Susan came. He said, "How was the reading?" She said, "Fantastic. You should have been there." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry I missed it." She said, "No, really, you should have been there. It was great." And he said, "Well, we were kind of doing the party." He said, "No, I'm the second best reader I know." And so he couldn't resist. He said, "Who's the first?" And she said, "James."
Wow.
So I know. I hope it's not too gooey for me to share a story like that, but he's not listening, so I can get away with saying things that would embarrass him deeply.
I won't tell him if you don't.
Because he is a modest guy. And yes, his relation to poetry is very real. Just is.
Right.
Means a lot to him.
No, I love what you say about his knowing the poetry, because I think it says so much about how the poetry is written.
Yes.
Has lived with it, and
yes,
I think it's so much a part of writing good poetry to live with a poem in your head and to walk around with it and be thinking about it all the time and trying to work out the lines that aren't what they should be, and things dawn on you as you're living life, and you can't.
I've seen his sort of what would be called worksheets, and they all very gone over. At the same time, I have this memory of looking out the window sometimes and watching him in the rose garden walking around. I could tell when he was thinking about prose, and I could tell when he was thinking about a poem by the rhythmic gait. And then I couldn't tell when he was thinking about the garden, because I could, because he would stop and sort of stare. But when he was thinking about what he was writing, he would just circumnavigate the rose garden. And she's just walking. Because, yes, I mean, there are some people, for instance, have no idea what I think until I write it down. So my first drafts are always a mess. But for James, he can compose in his head. So often writing it down is like the last thing. So to come across a worksheet, which I never did until getting his papers together for Texas, the Ransom Center, I saw these sheets where he would sort of go over things. I found very touching because whatever he had decided, he changed his mind again and was trying to sort of work out. And then some of this stuff was written when he was abroad. And so he's sitting somewhere and not walking. Or I would imagine he got up and walked and then sat down again. But as someone who also used to write in public because nobody knew, he's sitting there sort of struggling, listening. I think he has an ability to hear himself. That's crucial to what he does. And he used to say, if you can shout a line, you can sing it.
You can shout a line and you can sing it.
Yeah.
And you can sing it. It's a litmus test I had never thought of.
Yeah.
But I like it.
Yeah.
Darryl, will you go ahead and read the poem for me, please?
I'll try.
In Paris with you?
He's better. Look him up on YouTube. He's
but
better
you're
at reading
willing,
it.
so.
I'm willing. So, and the door is closed, so he's not coming in. In Paris with you. Don't talk to me of love. I've had an earful, and I get tearful when I've downed a drink or two. I'm one of your talking wounded. I'm a hostage. I'm maroonded. But I'm in Paris with you. Yes, I'm angry at the way I've been bamboozled and resentful at the mess that I've been through. I admit I'm on the rebound, and I don't care where are we bound. I'm in Paris with you. Do you mind if we do not go to the Louvre? If we say sod off to sodding Notre Dame? If we skip the Champs Elysees and remain here in this sleazy old hotel room, doing this and that to what and whom, learning who you are, learning what I am? Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris, the little bit of Paris in our view. There's that crack across the ceiling and the hotel walls are peeling, and I'm in Paris with you. Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris. I'm in Paris with the slightest thing you do. I'm in Paris with your eyes, your mouth. I'm in Paris with all points south. Am I embarrassing you? I'm in Paris with you.
It is funny, Darryl worried often about being sentimental and embarrassing in this interview, but I did not think about how that same anxiety is directly addressed in these lines. There is a major musicality in this poem, so it should be lots of fun to learn by heart. Let's begin with the first stanza.
Don't talk to me of love. I've had an earful, and I get tearful when I've downed a drink or two. I'm one of your talking wounded. I'm a hostage. I'm maroonded. But I'm in Paris with you. Don't talk to me of love. I've had an earful, and I get tearful when I've downed a drink or two. I'm one of your talking wounded. I'm a hostage. I'm maroonded. But I'm in Paris with you.
There's this moment in Elizabeth Hardwick's Sleepless Nights where she writes, "Every great city is a lord's, where you hope to throw off your crutches, but meanwhile must stumble along on them, hobbling under the protection of the shrine." In Fenton's poem, we see the draw and the healing power of a city, and that power does not come from romance, but from scale, that it is a place to be small. and cower and regain the anonymity to know oneself and understand one's love.
Yes, I'm angry at the way I've been bamboozled and resentful at the mess that I've been through. I admit I'm on the rebound, and I don't care where are we bound. I'm in Paris with you. Yes, I'm angry at the way I've been bamboozled and resentful at the mess that I've been through. I admit I'm on the rebound, and I don't care where are we bound. I'm in Paris with you.
Here is the part that Darryl calls the jazz bridge. So that you can visualize it on the page here, it is indented against the other stanzas. It has shorter lines and more of them, and thus a long appearance.
Do you mind if we do not go to the Louvre? If we say sod off to sodding Notre Dame? If we skip the Champs Elysees and remain here in this sleazy old hotel room, doing this and that to what and whom, learning who you are, learning what I am? Do you mind if we do not go to the Louvre? If we say sod off to sodding Notre Dame? If we skip the Champs Elysees and remain here in this sleazy old hotel room, doing this and that to what and whom, learning who you are, learning what I am?
To me, the most poignant choice in this whole poem is the moment Fenton writes, learning who you are, learning what I am. It is such a beautiful and subtle observation that while the narrator might unfurl a lover's interiority in this period of intimacy, the narrator is also learning to hold himself at an objective distance.
Do you mind if we do not go to the Louvre? If we say sod off to sodding Notre Dame? If we skip the Champs Elysees and remain here in this sleazy old hotel room, doing this and that to what and whom, learning who you are, learning what I am? Do you mind if we do not go to the Louvre? If we say sod off to sodding Notre Dame? If we skip the Champs Elysees and remain here in this sleazy old hotel room, doing this and that to what and whom, learning who you are, learning what I am?
The Racine Hotel, R.I.P., I suppose.
Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris, the little bit of Paris in our view. There's that crack across the ceiling and the hotel walls are peeling, and I'm in Paris with you. Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris, the little bit of Paris in our view. There's that crack across the ceiling and the hotel walls are peeling, and I'm in Paris with you.
Here is the final stanza of the poem.
Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris. I'm in Paris with the slightest thing you do. I'm in Paris with your eyes, your mouth. I'm in Paris with all points south. Am I embarrassing you? I'm in Paris with you. Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris. I'm in Paris with the slightest thing you do. I'm in Paris with your eyes, your mouth. I'm in Paris with all points south. Am I embarrassing you? I'm in Paris with you.
Let's hear the poem in its entirety one more time.
Don't talk to me of love. I've had an earful, and I get tearful when I've downed a drink or two. I'm one of your talking wounded. I'm a hostage. I'm maroonded. But I'm in Paris with you. Yes, I'm angry at the way I've been bamboozled and resentful at the mess that I've been through. I admit I'm on the rebound, and I don't care where are we bound. I'm in Paris with you. Do you mind if we do not go to the Louvre? If we say sod off to sodding Notre Dame? If we skip the Champs Elysees and remain here in this sleazy old hotel room, doing this and that to what and whom, learning who you are, learning what I am? Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris, the little bit of Paris in our view. There's that crack across the ceiling and the hotel walls are peeling, and I'm in Paris with you. Don't talk to me of love. Let's talk of Paris. I'm in Paris with the slightest thing you do. I'm in Paris with your eyes, your mouth. I'm in Paris with all points south. Am I embarrassing you? I'm in Paris with you.
And that was our poem. I hope it unfolded for you in a way which made you glad to make it your own. And I hope you can hold on to it. Review it on paper or let it live more like a song in your memory. Thank you to Susie Boyd for lending me this podcast's title, to GW Sock and the X for use of their song, The Art of Losing, which borrows the words of Elizabeth Bishop. And thank you to my sound engineer, Alex.
Disaster. Except the fluster of lost or key.